Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, and this is the next video wherein we are going to do an interesting question of binary tree. It's quite of a like as a medium problem you can say, but it's just I would say that it's an easy as well because it's just a logic building which is required for this particular question. Otherwise, talking about the code is just a piece of cake. There are many questions based which are based on this particular logic. Even if you would have watched my previous video wherein I had discussed a problem wherein we had to create a binary tree out of a sorted array. Well, sorted array is nothing just an in-order traversal of a BST, right? So that's what we had converted in the previous video. So in this particular video, we are doing the similar thing. Over here, just the difference is that we have been given something called as a pre-order traversal, and out of which we have to convert that into the BST. So I believe that the problem statement, it's pretty much clear. It's just that BST has to be created and the numbers are thrown to you in the form of an array. So this is an array which has been given to us in the pre-order fashion. So this means we have to convert that into a BST. So pre-order traversal is nothing. It's just something called as wherein we just consider the new node first, and then we take the left node, and then we take the right node. This is how the numbers are being given to us. So considering that fact, we just have to keep 2-3 things while doing this particular question. So in the previous problem as well, when we had to create the array from the sorted array, we were considering that every node that we have to create, we just need to make sure that we put that in the right range. So what I mean by that is that in binary search, like when we were doing the binary search in this particular question, we were making sure that whatever the lower limits that we are putting up for a particular node and the higher limits, higher bounds, that has to be, in a proper way, because in BST we need to satisfy the property that the left node that we're going to be creating should be less than that of the root node, right? So that is something which we need to keep in our mind. Let me show you one picture. Maybe that's how it will be better clear to you. So you can see that in this particular picture, the very first node which we have created over here, it's having an entire range. It is from minus infinite to plus infinite. But talking about the left node that we have, it is again having the lower limit as a minus infinite, but talking about the upper range, it shouldn't be more than that of this number 8, right? This is something which we need to keep in our mind when we are creating a BST. So this thing was done also in the question when we were doing the in-order traversal. I mean, when we were given the in-order traversal, that was a sorted array. So you were making sure that we have the proper ranges so as to create a particular node. So in this question as well, because we will be just thrown with the numbers, right? We will be getting just the numbers from the array which has been given to us. So firstly, it is very much evident that whatever the first element that we have in that array, that's going to be the root element. That's going to be the first node, right? So that particular element can be made as a first element. So when we will be creating the next node, let's suppose if we are creating the left side node of that after that after that first node, so that means the second element should be passed on something called as the new range so as to create it. So in that particular next node, we need to pass on minus infinite, because that's going to be the left node, so it can have any kind of a value that is ranging from minus infinite. But talking about the upper limit, that has to be the root value, because it shouldn't be exceeding that value. So that means min value comma 8, that has to be the limit for the left hand side. But talking about the right hand side, if we will have to consider that what should be the range for the right hand side nodes that we're going to be creating, it should be in such a way that the plus side range is something which can be anything, right? We can just take it as a maximum value. But talking about the lower limit, it should be the root value. That means it shouldn't be exceeding, it shouldn't be going below that particular value. That means the number 8 is going to be the minimum value which can be created over here, right? It can be 9, it can be 10, it can be 8.5, but it shouldn't be going beyond this particular number. So that's how we create the BST, considering this particular logic, that how do we need to pass on the ranges. So let me write down the code as well. Maybe that's how it's going to be better clear, and that's how we can proceed further. All right, so let me just zoom this a little bit so that it'll be more clear. Okay, so I believe it's pretty simple problem. It's not much of a tedious problem. It's just a little bit of understanding that we need, that how we need to pass on the limits so as to create the BST out of this particular pre-order traversal which has been given to us. So okay, so this is basically the class, and this is a method which is asking for the root node which needs to be passed, right? So in this particular case, what we're going to be doing, first of all, let me just make some global variables. So because that's going to be the standard one, right? So that's the reason I'm keeping this as over here. So min, okay, so that's going to be something called as integer dot min value, right? And the next would be the integer max value, so that needs to be something called as integer dot max value, right? And there is also something which I need to keep it as global, that is going to be the index value, because I will be passing on to a different method. So I want the index to be standard whenever I'm giving it a check. So how do we need to proceed further? So let me create a new method which is going to be like as I will call this method as create tree, and it will be asking for two things, right? One is I need the lower bound, and the next thing that I need is the higher bound, right? So initially, well, I will be calling out this method because as of now, I'm just passing on the root node, right? So that means I can pass on something called as min and max, because first of all, the very first node which I'm going to be creating over here, it should be something called as the minimum or the maximum. So I will do one thing, I will just simply return node from this particular method, and that will be straight away will be returned, right? And that's gonna end this particular method. So that's how we need to work on this particular question. So what I'm going to be doing over here, I will be creating the tree, that to be from the scratch. So that means first of all, I need to mention my base condition, right? So the base condition will be in such a way. So I'll put this everything on my GitHub repository so that you can have the access to this particular code. So this is just something like as a basic understanding. So first of all, we need to understand what about the base condition that we want to do. If my so the very first condition is going to be something like as if index will be equals to something called as pre-order. Okay, so there is one more thing I need to pass on, which I can do or which I don't. If I want to, I can also make this as a global variable, but on the other hand, I'll do one thing, I'll just pass on this so as to keep this thing as easy, right? Okay, so this is going to be my array which will be passed, and I need to mention something called as a base condition when my index value will be equals to pre-order length. Then I just have to return something called as null. That's going to be my base condition, because whenever I'm going to be reaching to the very last element of the array, I just need to end this particular method. I don't want to proceed further anywhere, right? So that's going to be the base condition. So let me write down a little bit more, maybe that's how it's going to help you a little bit and to understand this particular question. So the very first thing is that I will be creating a node over here, right? So let's call this as, because that's going to be something called the root. So let's just call this as a root, and this is going to be, so I need to pass on the very first element, the very first value that has to be there for this particular root node. So what that would be, whatever the array that I have, right? I need to pass on the index value. Pretty simple, right? Because what I'm doing over here, as of now, I haven't done anything. It's just the basic code which I have written. So this is basically my very first method which has been given to us, and from there I'm calling the next method which is going to be creating the tree for us. So how exactly the tree will be created? The tree will be created in such a way, it's going to be pretty simple, right? Okay, give me a second. Okay, so the tree will be created in a very easy way. What we are doing is that we are just passing on the ranges, like the lower limits as well as the higher limits, and basis on that we are constructing our tree. So the very first thing is that I'm creating a node over here that is going to be my root node, and that root node is going to be getting the value from my array. So initially my index is basically equals to 0 just to start from the scratch. So that very first value will be passed on to this particular object creation, and that will pass on the value to the root node. Next is if I will have to take the left hand side, then what would that be? So if I'll have to create the root dot left, then in that particular case, I need to pass on the value, right? I need to call this method recursively, and how we are going to be calling this particular method is pretty simple. So we just have to pass on something called as the range for this particular left node, and what would that be? That's going to be something called as low, right? And the highest point is going to be something called as root dot val, because it shouldn't be exceeding whatever the left node that we are going to be creating. It shouldn't be exceeding the value. Exceeding the value, what I mean by that whatever the value that we have created for the root node, right, that has to be the range for this particular point. And next is when I will be creating the right node, then that has to be something called as in this way. So the lower value for this particular point for this particular node can be root dot val, and talking about the higher side, it can be something called as high, right? And I need to also pass on this parameter, which is my array, and also over here, right? And simply at the end, what we need to do, we need to return the root, because that's going to be the root node that what we want to return, right? So let me explain you the code once again. And also, because for the base condition, we haven't mentioned everything as of now. The only base condition at the initial point we had was something called as that the index shouldn't be more than that of the pre-order length. That's my array. But on the other hand, talking about the main thing which we need to consider, that just imagine for a fact whatever the value that you're getting from your pre-order array, right? Let me drop down this thing. Whatever the value that we have in this particular array, if that value, just imagine for a fact, if that value exceeds the value from the higher side, right? And just imagine for a fact that whatever the value that we have, it's also going below than that of the lower bound, then we just need to simply return the null. Let me explain you the logic over here, why exactly we are doing this particular thing. So let's go back to the original picture that we had seen over here. Just imagine for a fact, I'm at this particular point, right? I'm at this particular point, or let's say I'm at this particular point, just for a fact, because over here we have both of the lower bounds and the upper bounds, because over here it's a min value, so that doesn't make any sense. Just imagine for a fact over here I am, right? In this particular case, just imagine for a fact that whatever the ranges that we have set for this particular node, because that will be passed from the previous place, right? Because over here, when I will be creating root dot right, I will be passing on the upper bounds and the lower bounds. So the upper bounds and the lower bounds has been passed 3 and 8. And now when I'm traversing the array and I'm getting the value as number 9, so that will be exceeding, right? That will be exceeding this upper bound. That will be 9. It will be greater than that 8, right? So that means I cannot fix this and cannot fix that particular value over here. So that has to be, just created as a null node. But on the other hand, if I will be getting the value which is going to be in between of this 3 and 8, then I can definitely fulfill the condition. I can create the node. But talking about the number which I'm going to be traversing from the array, if that's not going to be inside of the limit, then I'll have to just simply create the null. So that's what we are doing over here in this particular question as well. We just need to set the ranges properly, and if the index value of this particular array is going beyond that of the range which we have set, we just need to create the null, right? That's what we have done so far, and that's how we are returning the root. Let me just simply try and run this particular case. Let's see if that's going to be, I believe that's okay. So there is some kind of an error that we are getting. Let me see what that is. Okay, so it is saying that cannot find the symbol. Okay, so it's basically something great. Tree has to be over here, right? Now let's try to run this. Okay, so it's saying pass time limit has been exceeded. It shouldn't be happening. I'm just you know missing out certain things. Okay, so seems out to be like we are not incrementing the index, right? Maybe that's the reason, because every time we are gonna be putting an element inside of this root, we need to increment the index as well, right? So let's try to run the code now. I believe it's gonna work. Yeah, it has accepted. Let's submit this. Perfect. So yeah, that's it. I hope I was able to explain you the code in a proper way. If you have any kind of a question, you can just definitely put that in the comment box. Otherwise, I tried my level best. I hope the question is pretty simple. If you have any kind of a confusion, you can also watch the previous video wherein I have explained the BST creation from the sorted array. It's a pretty simple problem. It's a similar question as well. Once that question will be clear to you, it will be just a piece of cake for you, because over here as well, we're just setting up the limits in a different way, and that's how we are calling the root left and the root right. We're just incrementing the index one by one. That's how we are getting the values, and whatever the value that we get is that we just passing on to that while creating a particular node. And the base condition is something like when we reach out to the end of the array, we just have to return the null. And if the value is exceeding or just going below the lower or the upper bounds respectively, we just have to return the null. That's pretty much it. That's a pretty simple problem. Yeah, so I hope you liked the video. If you have any question, you can put that in the comment box, and see you next time. Thanks.